Thank you, guys. I started, like Michael, working with clients. I was a physical therapist first. That's what I did out of school, was in orthopedics. And then I kept doing, graduate work in nutrition, health education, that kind of thing. But for my own knowledge, I was just very interested as a professional bodybuilder back then. And I never thought I would do something like this. This was just very organic as people needed this curriculum, needed the information. And now we have something in this industry that I would have never anticipated. There's a lot of good to that, a lot more accessibility to information, but I've also seen a lot of bad, where you would think more people, more professionals, more education would help. It really mixes with an awful lot of misinformation. And that's some of what I want to cover tonight, or some of the different trends, some of the, what I used to call fad diets. Now it's almost vicious misinformation. It's almost sensationalized, where people are really just after the numbers, kind of clickbait in social media. People know the loudest voices are going to attract the most viewers, which means the most potential sales and that kind of thing. So instead of our movement creating better clarity, I really think today it's almost worse than it was 20 years ago. So I'm going to ask you guys some questions. I'm going to ask you to participate a little bit. Tell me what your knowledge base is and what perspectives you have. Because I truly believe no matter how I say nutrition is best applied, in my opinion, there are a lot of schools of thought, and even if they're in total not the best, there are always things we can learn from that. So I've stayed up and continued to consume a lot of research, look at everything that people are doing, and that's what I think my specialty is cutting through some of that BS, making sure that people have the best information. So I see a lot of healthy, fit people. So Candace and Mike have been doing a great job already, but who has goals specifically to lose weight, and you're engaged in a process right now, and you're committed to this being the last time you do this? You're on your way to your best health, best life ever. So, all right, some good people here. And I talked to some of Michael's clients today who are engaged in that process. And you guys specifically, hopefully you're new enough to hearing through Michael and maybe Candace how nutrition works on a different level. So first of all, tell me what your experience has been so far. What's news to you? What has been different in your journey so far? Yes?
Carbs don't make you fat.
Okay. So you're learning that you can eat carbs, so there's not an entire food group you have to just say no to. Good. Somebody else raise their hand?
You need to eat more to lose weight.
Okay. Sometimes, yeah.
The right foods.
Right. You've got more nutritional density in some foods, so sometimes you're surprised how much you can eat.
You need to support your training.
Right.
With your nutrition.
So training alone's not going to necessarily get you where you want to go. Nutrition's a big part. Okay. Tell me your why. Big statement a lot of people use now, especially in business training and self-development. It's very common to say, okay, what's your why? What's your biggest motive? Tell me why you want that. What would make you seek a challenging program, something that's going to make you work hard, but you obviously see that it's worthwhile? Let me buffer that statement by saying that all kinds of studies show how difficult it is to keep lost weight off. I read one study several years ago that said 98% of people who lose weight regain it back within a year. Later I saw stats that were anywhere from 90 to 97%. One study showed that when people in our country lose weight, 5 years later, the average person weighs 107% of their original weight. So however you cut up those metrics, it's pretty darn difficult to maintain your weight loss. So I would ask you again, what is your greatest motive? Yes?
When I'm done having kids, I want to get my weight down and just be healthy and more active and have more energy. And my goals have always been, years ago I used to do Spartan races, and I want to get back to it.
Okay.
And just feel better.
Awesome. So feeling better, getting that energy back, some time for you now that the kids are moving on. Who else has a goal? Specific goal. This is why I want to do this.
Right now, for me, she mentioned Spartan races, and we talked earlier that I started late in life for obstacle course racing, and one of my biggest challenges is a lot of my hanging stuff, and a lot of that is due to excess weight and trying to do certain things. So I have specific goals around racing that I'm trying to meet, and I feel I have to lose the weight in order to do it.
Gotcha. Anybody here want to look better? Okay. Oh, finally. Okay, now you offer that one. All right. So there are, we're complex creatures, so we often have a lot of different goals, but that is typically the one that drives people in the door most often. I was actually giving a lecture to a high school yesterday, and in Evansville, Indiana, we have what's just perennially one of the top 5 high schools of the country. So this is 100 kids. I've been asked to do this, I think, every year for about 10 years. It's always the freshman health class. So I know I've got about 100 of the brightest minds in the country in front of me. And so I ask a question like that, because these are teenagers, right? They're 15, 16 years old, and what's a health scientist going to do to make it fun for them? I'm just a guest speaker. They all come in, they immediately put their headphones on, and the teacher makes them take their headphones off, and so, I've got a tough crowd. So I asked that question yesterday, and of course, one person raised their hand, and they started talking about being healthy and so forth. So I said, well, how many of you are worried about your cholesterol level? And of course, they laughed. They're 15 years old. So I asked again, tell me the real reason you would be interested in losing weight, becoming healthier, that kind of thing. And somebody, said because of how we look. And this is especially true for adolescents. I've seen child psychologists do studies like this, do questionnaires. And the number one concern, and I'm talking life or death crisis for teenagers, is their appearance. Specifically, number one in that category is their complexion. So they're not worried about world peace and things like that and their longevity, but they desperately care about how they look. And not so ironically, that's, as I said, what brings even adults to us more than not. And that's not a bad thing. I could get very social psychology on you guys and talk about how we as Homo sapiens are very pro-social. So we do care about what we look and where we fit into the group and that kind of thing. That's entirely utilitarian and even helpful. Because if you didn't care about things like that, wouldn't you just kind of dive over to the hedonist side? If you didn't care what you look like, why would you just stop eating? I mean, pizza tastes good. I'd be 200 pounds overweight and wouldn't give a shit, right? I mean, so the reason it's good is because it does drive you to compare yourself to other people, which can be very bad, but we can take some good elements of that in context. So in my conversation with these kids, trying to make them feel like it's okay to worry about how you look and so forth, keep that in the perspective of, giving other people a break. One of the things I love to do with kids is talk about those more global personal issues, how they can interact with other people. So we want to care about how we look, but we also want to care about how we treat other people and not, judge other people by those kind of things. So in that vein, I asked the question, has anybody here thought about where you're going to be in 5 years or 10 years? Anybody in this room self-aware enough and maybe vulnerable enough to just answer the question, who do you want to be? And one guy instantly raised his hand and he said, well, I'm going to be a financial analyst and I'm going to be living in Manhattan and I'm going to be fit. He specifically said that. And I said, that's awesome. I'm glad you have those specific goals because I think that we certainly do end up surprised sometimes how those products of our habits and decisions sneak up on us. So I said, how are you going to be that person? And of course, he's going to go to the right schools and so forth and make the right contacts and end up on Wall Street. And in this particular school that I'm speaking at, that's more than likely going to happen. If that's his goal, that's going to happen. But I said, why do you want to be fit? And he said, because when you're fat, people don't take you as serious. And that just kind of, I mean, that's a heavy weight, right? In any room, that is a heavy weight. And I said, well, unfortunately, that is unbelievably true. Social science research proves that to be true. I mean, it can be your race, it can be your religion, it can be the way you look, it can be your age, it can be your gender. Pick anything, and we are instantly categorized. And again, that's part of normal evolution. That's what your brain does. When stimulus comes into your brain, you automatically categorize it. It goes through grids. The first thing is threat or non-threat. Whatever information's coming in, is this something that I'm okay with? And then you can kind of, categorize it even further. But there are all these just almost second by second binary decisions where we're putting labels on things and categorizing. That's how our brain works. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, but that's the impulsive side of the brain. What biologists might call the reptilian brain, kind of the cerebellum and the brainstem and so forth. There are other parts of our brain that we can use that are better, but sometimes we have to remap that and become a little bit more aware and practice those things. So to my student who said, I'm going to be on Wall Street, I'm going to be a broker, I'm going to be successful, and I'm going to be fit, I said, tell me what it takes to be that person. That's who you want to be. Give me some of those character traits that it takes. And he said, confidence. I'm going to have to be confident. And I said, well, why would you choose to be confident, and why do you think being overweight makes you less desirable as a broker? And he said, because people trust people who are confident, and if you're fit, you already have the appearance of somebody who's disciplined and makes good decisions. This is a 15-year-old kid, by the way, right? I mean, I like where he's going. He's thought through a lot of things. And so I said, that's fantastic. I agree. What are you doing right now to train yourself to be confident? What habits are you embracing and are you doing repetitively to become that person? Because I can tell you that in 5 years, when you want to be that person, if you haven't made decisions like that person would make, your 5-year future self, if you're not making decisions that he would make right now, you will never get there. And I guess next year, I'm going to be 50 years old. Talk about gravity in a room. I never thought that day would come. When I was his age, I didn't think that was even possible. I thought 50 years old, I would be in a wheelchair or something. But all of those cliches about time sneaking up on you and, man, it goes fast, it's way worse than that. It happens faster and it's way more painful, I can tell you. But interestingly, I found we adjust to those things. We change and we learn new things. We evolve personally. We have different lives. We were just talking about, kids and so forth. And my youngest child is a freshman now, and I have 2 out of the house. And so all the things that my life has revolved around in the last 20 years is very different. But I can tell you that in those 20 years, I am a product of those decisions I've made that long. And the best advice I can ever give somebody on will you be able to succeed? If 90 to 98% of people regain all their weight back and they fail over and over and over, you have not learned yet to listen to that future self. We sometimes think that, man, once I reach this line, I've got it planned out. Here's my chart. As soon as I get to this day, or as soon as I lose 50 pounds, I will have met my goal. That's the finish line. Maybe it's the starting line. And maybe if you're not being that person, if you're not making decisions like that person in the future would make then, not only will you never get there, but you'll never know what it's like to sustain that and move forward. So one of the things I'm going to kind of circle back to is some of the things that you can do with your brain, your organic brain, not just emotions and thoughts, to ensure that from day one when you start a process like this, you're setting yourself up to succeed. But you guys came to talk about nutrition, right? Learn some stuff. Learn some science. So tell me right now, there are always cyclical trends that happen in the industry, and I think the hottest one right now is probably intermittent fasting. Has anybody had any exposure to that? Any comments? I want to kind of tackle some of the major diet options, the methods that are available to you, and maybe talk about some of your experiences. So that one or anything else, low carb, low fat, what have you guys done? And tell me, most times you have some success, whether it's not long term. So let's just talk about a couple experiences. Tell me what you guys have done. Yes.
The one that lasted probably the longest, but I didn't keep up with it, was not necessarily counting calories, but looking at my food choices and doing more portion control. So eating smaller meals more frequently throughout the day while working out, and that got me to my goal.
Okay. And were you doing that on your own, or was somebody helping you with that?
I had a book that had a couple different meal ideas, okay. And then I would just go and pick up simple, slow cooking recipes and really just portion it out. I'm a nurse, so I have a lot of availability to information from nutritionists at the hospital. So I would go to some of those classes and just gain some information.
Were you tracking your food in any way with an app, or have a certain calorie goal or anything?
No, Mike actually taught me how to prep food. Make sure I had the food ready so that it was easy to go and grab, and especially with 3 kids.
So was this process with Mike or before?
No, I was his neighbor.
Okay.
And kind of in between, we would just talk, and our sons played together, and he would give me some good advice, and I would listen, and I would use it, and definitely prepping was one of the big ones that helped me out, and also helped me with portion control. Because if I prepped it and I put it in a container, then I'm not overeating, because that's all I have.
Okay. So just eating less, per meal, more meals per day, eating healthier, good decisions, that's just so boring. So we're going to categorize that as the normal, boring way of dieting. Okay.
I got bored with the food.
Okay. Anybody do anything much more exciting?
So I haven't done anything personally, but my daughter has tried everything out there. She's done paleo, she's done intermittent fasting, she's done no carbs, she's done, basically just eating fat, protein, and vegetables. She's done everything. She has about 75 to maybe 80 pounds that she really should lose. She's a power lifter, so a lot of her strength depends on food. But she's tried everything. She'll lose 15, 20 pounds, and then she'll give up that, whatever form of crazy diet it is at that point, and gain everything plus back. So I've seen it all. I have never really tried any of it. I did do a little no-carb thing with her for a little while. Then I met Candy. But none of it ever worked for her. And it was a roller coaster ride. It still is.
So let's talk about that for a couple minutes. And so going from paleo to intermittent fasting, low carb, anything, and she'll create some success, and then she relapses and gains some back. So one of the first things that should seem kind of obvious is that when you do something very extreme, you're probably going to have an extreme rebound. So I want to explain a little bit of the metabolic science behind that and show you the different ways of dieting and why they can be successful short-term or even long-term, but what you may learn from some of those and what may be just in a wholesale way ridiculous. So a lot of people compare the zero-carb or low-carb diets to kind of a normal balanced diet as the antithesis of each other. And you almost have to park yourself in one camp or the other. And I did a lot of literature review work about a year ago, and I wrote, I think it was about 10 articles that were in Huffington Post. And I really, at this time, because I hadn't done it in about 20 years, I wanted to go through all of the current macronutrient research, look at all of the stuff being studied out there, and find out exactly what research was showing to be the single best way to lose weight. So, of course, what rises to the top, what people are most interested in, are the ketogenic or low-carb diets. You know them by names like the Atkins diet. Paleo is a version of it. South Beach diet is back in the game. They're doing a lot of advertising again. So all versions of that, you almost have to love it or hate it. You know, that's what in the pop culture magazines you would think. And it's really 1 and 2. If you look at the research, one is not the worst and one is not the best, comparing low carb to normal or higher carb, low fat. They're not opposite. One, when studied, even against every other diet option, one of them always comes in first place, one of them always comes in second place. And it really depends on how they're studied. So if you have a low-carb diet, and I mean like 0 carbs, you just eat protein and fat, you will lose weight very rapidly, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. Because you're getting rid of your body's primary source of energy, which is glucose or carbohydrate, which is most easily converted into glucose. So almost 100 trillion cells in your body, and if you're taking away its primary source of glucose, it has to go to a secondary source of energy very quickly, and the most readily available at that point is going to be body fat. And if you're not careful, lean body mass or muscle tissue, if you go too far, which is one of the dangers of those diets, but you can get rapid results. And you can also end up impacting cholesterol. Even though you're eating high amounts of saturated fat potentially, you can see your overall cholesterol go down, your LDLs go down. So a lot of physicians have gotten on board with this because it's extremely effective initially. But who here has gone on a low-carb diet where you're basically just eating no starch? Okay, how great was it? I mean, was it awesome? Like, is anybody still doing that now? So the reason it's so torturous is because, again, as your body's primary source of energy, you're basically putting yourself in kind of a starvation mode. You can adapt. And for your brain to start living happily on ketone bodies, it takes 2 to 3 months to get into an adaptive state. And then you have to stay there for your body to really become efficient at that. And even then, I would argue that it's not the best, most healthy way to live. So somebody who eats just that way, like I said, they're going to see initial results that really look fantastic. And even in research, it's going to show up, you know, that blood work is coming back and so forth. But there are 2 ways of doing research on nutrition. One is for you to sign up for this study, and you get assigned to a group, and you're told, okay, this is how you're going to eat. Go home and eat this way, and then come back, and we're going to weigh you occasionally, do some body comp analysis, and then it's called self-reporting. So how many people who are on a 0-carb diet do you think come back in and say, oh yeah, you know, I binged on 12 cupcakes this weekend. I still want paid for my part in the research project. So we know, just from the people who even admit that they're lying, that there's up to 30% false data. So you're a researcher, right? And you're trying to make decisions based on all of this empirical data. And you know the people who are willing to say, I lied to you during that study, is 30%. I mean, to me, that's almost invalid. I don't know how you could even do nutrition research that way. All of those studies that compare low-carb diets to others, when it's self-reported research, those ketogenic diets win. Low-carb diets win. And you know why they win? Because at least 30% of people aren't doing it. They're lying and they're still eating carbs. When you put people in an inpatient setting and you say, okay, you signed up for this, sucker, so you get no carbs, and I mean no carbs for 12 weeks or 24 weeks, and so you're locked in a cell basically, Guess which diet doesn't win then? Now all of a sudden, when you're forced to be on zero carbs compared to people who get more moderate amounts of carbs, still managed, because carbs are still something we have to control, then all of a sudden ketogenic diets come in second place. In a lower fat, higher carb diet wins. So again, they're always first and second. I'm not saying low carb diets don't have a place. Dominique, one of our friends down in Florida, is a professor, I think, at University of Florida, has done all kinds of research. If you want to learn about ketogenic diets, he's the guy to learn it from. He gets millions and millions of dollars in grant research from the government to study this stuff. He does it for people like Navy SEALs. He has a TED Talk and all that stuff, and it's phenomenal research. If you want to live like that, if you want to live on zero carbs. So Dom, I've been with him a few times in Florida, and he typically eats twice a day, and this is his low-carb diet. He gets, kind of a salad for breakfast and breakfast and dinner, and he'll make, maybe a dozen eggs or something like that for breakfast, and put half a pound of bacon, and make this, big breakfast omelet, and he'll put a stick of butter in a cup of coffee, like one whole stick of butter in a cup of coffee. I don't even like coffee to begin with, so I don't even know what a stick of butter would taste like, but apparently people like that. Then at night he'll do the same thing with maybe salmon and so forth, but zero starch. And this guy, because he understands that for people with things like stage 4 cancer, epilepsy, talk about kind of a zero inflammation diet. Somebody had questions earlier. I mean, if you want zero starch, zero sugar, you're going to have some health benefits. There are some good things to that. As I said, in clinical research, it doesn't even show up that it's necessarily better. At best, it's close to as good as a low-fat, more moderate carb diet, but let's say for certain medical and health conditions that it's viable. Could you still eat that way? Would you say, I will never have another French fry? I will never have another piece of birthday cake? Because when you do that and you're keto-adaptive, you've just screwed the pooch. It's over. You now have to go through that whole acclimation process because you're throwing sugar into a system that's used to being run on ketone bodies. Now, Dom would say that's not entirely true. You can withstand some things like that, so you could eat that little piece of birthday cake once in a while and you're not going to die and all that stuff. But again, you have to be that careful or you're truly not doing that. So anybody who's committed to that kind of eating, I would not say that's horrible. There are health benefits. I think it's so impractical that I agree with the studies that show it is the least sustainable way of eating. It is the least sustainable. It is the number one way of creating eating disordered behavior. It's the number one way of just binging. It's the number one way of coming off of a diet the fastest and feeling like crap about yourself because you just keep failing cyclically because hardly anybody can do a no-carb diet. So I want to make that clear. I'm not anti that. It has its place. I just don't think that many people can do it. And as I said, that's very, very supportive. So if something else has clinically been shown to be better or at least about the same, and you can still eat carbs, I for one would sign up for that one. Well, how about you guys? In for some carbs? So let's look at how we can apply that then. What other kinds of diet methods? You mentioned intermittent fasting, and that's one of the things that I just mentioned was happening with eating maybe just 2 meals a day. Some people only eat 1 meal a day. What becomes impractical about that is if you're very, very active, especially with any kind of performance sport or just your own training, it is really, really tough. I mean, I for one, somebody who's even somewhat sedentary, but they're just getting into exercise, I think you need to look at 3 or 4 meals / snacks per day minimum. Most people need about 4 or 5. But what I do like about intermittent fasting, and the fact that in the last 5 years it's kind of become this craze that most people have tried, is gotten us weaned off of the idea that we just have to eat around the clock. Oh my God, it's been 3 hours, I got to eat or I'm going to lose 10 pounds of muscle. or my metabolism's going to crash and I'm going to die. I'm going to gain 50 pounds of body fat because I missed a meal. So many people have that mindset that we've created addictions to food, and we almost set our clocks around eating. And so for people to see, wow, I can eat 2 meals a day or 3 meals a day, and I'm not losing muscle, I'm not losing strength. Matter of fact, oh my gosh, I can go 6 hours without eating, and I didn't die. That creates, a really big release in us feeling like I just don't have to format my entire schedule around food. So I've done all kinds of things. For one of my master's degrees, I did a 6-month stint of vegetarianism. I repeated that years later for a full year because I wanted to see, at the time, another wave of vegetarianism was kind of hitting the market, and I wanted to test more of the practical nature of that. Do you guys have any questions on specific types of dieting like that? Yes. Vegan? Is that something you're interested in, or that you do?
I tried it.
So I'll give you my experience and kind of put that against what I think normal physiology would support. In my first master's degree, I was a bodybuilder, and I was young and pretentious and thought I knew, more than all my professors and all that. So going through a nutrition program where most professors are talking about, kind of the RDA and, this is the way things are. And here I'm a bodybuilder reading magazines that say you should eat 300 grams of protein a day until your kidneys are exploding and all of that. So I wanted to kind of prove that eating the RDA level of protein would be ridiculous. It would you're going to lose all of your muscle. So I was at the IU Med School and in the National Institute for Fitness and Sport. I was hydrostatically weighed by people and so forth at the beginning and after for 6 months. And I was a very specific diet. I had 75 grams of protein a day. And it was all vegetarian, but all vegan. So not even lacto-ovo. I was not using protein powder, eggs, or anything. It was all that. And I was set. I was going to prove once and for all. I was going to change the entire world of academic nutrition that we have to consume a lot more protein. And I ended up losing 15 pounds during that 6-month time frame. And so you would think, okay, now a bodybuilder who's training hard, doing cardio, dieting to lose 15 pounds, with protein that low, no animal products, probably almost all of that 15 pounds was going to be muscle. That was my contention, and 0 of it was muscle. So basically, I proved that all of science and my professors were right, and I was wrong, and the entire bodybuilding culture was wrong. But that was 6 months. Since that point, most science agencies, at least 20 of them, have come together. They even had this huge protein summit in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. And based on a lot of compiled research, they moved the RDA level of protein. For my body weight at that time, the RDA would have been about 50 to 60 grams of protein. So 75 was just a little bit over that. So they now all agree that about twice the RDA is better for health. Not just, here's the amount of protein for you not to die, but what would be healthy. So for somebody my size now, you would be looking at about 120 or so, 130 grams of protein to be optimal. So I decided just a few years ago, I'm going to redo this for a full year. And I had all my blood work done, and I especially wanted to see if just being casual about it, not necessarily tracking to the gram and all that stuff, can somebody live a healthy, normal life and enjoy that? So again, it was very liberating. I can go to Subway and just get a veggie sub. I'm just mowing on this foot-long thing of, bread and veggies, and I don't have to worry about protein. And, again, anybody who does this, a bunch of my clients did this because they knew I was doing it and they were excited. And everybody instantly feels better. The first couple weeks, like, oh my gosh, I feel better, I feel lighter, I'm losing weight, I just feel cleaner, better, all these things. I got to about the 9th or the 10th month, 11th month, and I just start feeling kind of softer, and I'm losing strength. I just wasn't feeling well. I think I noticed drops in libido, things like that, but I just wasn't sure. I would just, because, a good scientist almost tries to talk themselves out of their own biases, right? So I'm always, if I'm looking for something like, is this going to be this or this, has to be overwhelming to me to say that that's a factor. So I finally get to the end of a year, and I'm like, okay, I don't know how this is going. I don't know if this is really livable. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I have seasonal affect disorder or something else, but we'll get some blood work and we'll see. I thought after losing a little bit of weight that year and just having no protein, I would at least have lower levels of cholesterol, things like that. There was no change in virtually anything. I mean, some of my health factors were just off by 1. Like if my blood sugar was like 72, now it was 71. Or my LDL, if it was, 58, now it's 57. I mean, it was just, they were all a little better or a little worse by that small of margins. So I decided, I don't know, I'm not feeling that well. I've put in my year. I don't know if I want to live like this, because some of it was even just social conscious reasons. I understand that, eating animals is a higher cost to our planet and that kind of thing. And so I just thought, if this is a way to eat that's going to be better, I'm going to try it. So I decided after that year, I'm going to have a steak. And I mean, like, as I'm just chewing that first bite, I just feel like life coming back into my body. And talk about strength and energy coming back. And I'm just going to tell you that you can't outdo 5 to 7 million years of evolution. The intestinal tracts we have, the teeth we have, the fact that we have thrived as Homo sapiens when we were kind of a mid-pack species to destroy every other hominid group on the planet and rise to the top of the food chain. I've studied, I took a class on evolutionary biology just last semester at Harvard, and I can tell you that just because you want to be socially conscious doesn't change your biology. And so, but again, just like going through some changes of intermittent fasting, you learn some really cool things. Like again, I learned, okay, I don't need to eat that much animal protein. I don't have to eat chicken or turkey 4 times a day to be healthy. I still didn't lose, any lean body mass. I just learned, again, that, you need small amounts of these things, and maybe even being a lacto-ovo vegetarian so you can get some animal products that are less harmful to other animals, better for the planet, all that. So I am a fan of vegetarians because they are going to be better for my planet, but I'm not going to be one because we as a species need some animal protein. At least we live better that way. So again, I'm very pro responsibility in that area. I think there are certainly, most people who try a vegetarian diet, you're naturally just going to eat less saturated fat, less processed food, because you're making health decisions. I don't know many people who say, I'm going to be a vegan, therefore I'm going to eat Twinkies for every meal. Because there are no, usually you're doing it because you're making some better health decisions. So I'm all for people trying that. I just think after a certain amount of time, you're going to see that some animal protein is going to be better for you. So thank you for that good question.
I hear you about that I did it for a while, and then the first time I had that burger, it was like the heavens opened up. I was like, oh my God,
Yes.
This is the best thing I've ever eaten. So I hear you.
There is a God, and he has a meat cleaver in his hand. Who else? Who's done some other kind of diet that's not normal and boring, like
I have a question.
us?
If we can take a step back.
Yes.
You keep referring to intermittent fasting.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that? I'm not familiar with that.
So intermittent fasting, I'm not even sure if I understand or know the genesis of it, like where it originally came from, but I do know, I heard Jack LaLanne speak years ago before he passed away, and it was really unique for me to hear him say he only ate 2 meals a day. Now, he was 92 years old at the time, and he could still do one-arm push-ups on the stage, but he said, I eat at 11 in the morning and 7 at night. And I think it was mostly like big smoothie things, like he's putting everything in a blender and all this kind of thing. And, you know, if you're 92 years old, your metabolism is a little bit slower anyway. Even if you're active, that's just going to happen. So I don't know where that started, but something became a craze. Maybe even before that, I heard of one guy who would eat 1 meal a day.
So it's not days of not eating?
No, that's the intermittent part. So one of the schools I went to, I had a class on medical fasting. Things like the Mayo Clinic, they do things sometimes called a very low calorie diet, which is 500 calories or less. If you have to do an emergency surgery, you need just weight gone. Some people do fasting for other holistic reasons. And so I had this course, and it was optional to do this, but you could participate in fasting. And so a lot of us students, you know, the professor wanted us, if we would, to do like 1 day a week of fasting, so 24 hours. And again, you just learn like, wow, I can not eat for a day and the world still goes on. And, you know, it makes you just more disciplined, and then it's just easier to do other things, make other decisions. But we could also do a prolonged fast where you would do it for, you know, a day or 2 days. And I went 5 days on just water. So not juice. You know, a lot of people say, oh, I'm fasting. I'm fasting because I missed a meal. You know, that's not fasting. Or I'm fasting, I drink, you know, 70 quarts of grape juice every day. You know, fasting is nothing. And there are some really interesting autolytic things that happen in your body where you're digesting everything. And it's, you know, supposedly that's how you get rid of a lot of toxins really fast and that kind of thing. And you're bringing systemic inflammation down. It's really weird. I mean, you'll see why certain religions call fasting, you know, a spiritual discipline, because when your body is not digesting anything, because that's about 50% of your body's energy all day long, it's just you're either digesting and metabolizing and assimilating nutrients, or you are repairing and so forth, regenerating. And when you get rid of the digesting and assimilating part, and your body's just quiet. And you have no energy because you're not eating anything. But I can remember just you know, you're just peaceful. Like even when you're walking around doing things, I was still in orthopedic physical therapy, so I'm treating patients, and you're just like quiet. And you could sit down on a couch and you feel like you are one with the couch. Like nothing is going on in your body. It's just so peaceful. Obviously, you can't do that forever. I mean, so after 5 days, you know, I broke my fast as properly as we were taught and all that. But intermittent fasting is to say, okay, those same principles apply. We don't want to be digesting and shoving food on top of food, on top of food, on top of food. So let's get some food in there and then give your body time to use it and get completely empty before you do it again. Because even something like protein, you eat a chicken breast, it can take up to 6 hours or more for that to be totally digested. And so why are we eating every 3 hours? We're just, again, shoving food on top of food. So again, some of those things, some of those principles of intermittent fasting I like. It's just that in context, there are times when you really do need food faster. Because if you are training or something, you're going to use energy faster and you need that food sooner. So intermittent fasting comes in a lot of different varieties depending who you're speaking to. But it's typically eating a couple meals a day, or one of the most commercially successful ones is called an 8-16 fast, where you eat 3 or 4 meals within 8 hours and then you don't eat for 16. So most people, you know, skip breakfast in kind of a morning snack. They start eating at noon, so maybe lunch is their first meal. Then they have an afternoon snack or, you know, small meal. And then they have dinner at 8 or so, and then that's it. So they're probably, even if they're not tracking food, because not everybody tracks macronutrients, some people just do this, and they just innately, without even thinking about it, are going to eat less calories, right? Because you're not going to shove a whole day's worth of food in those 8 hours typically. Your schedule won't allow for it. You maybe can't. Like I said, you're probably making some healthier choices anyway because you're focused on your nutrition. But anybody else have anything to add about intermittent fasting? that I'm missing? Michael?
So when I have clients come to me, obviously, since it is all the rage now, I've had a lot of people come to me, and what they do is they take the IF or intermittent fasting, and they want to combine it with if it fits your macros, which everybody's familiar with, or macro-based dieting. And I've had actually a surprising amount of people come to me and say, okay, I'm going to do IF. Okay, great. Established macro profile, great. And then they eat whatever they want. So as long as they fit within that macro profile, they're going to eat pizza every day, they're going to eat cheeseburgers, whatever the case might be, but they're going to do it in that short period of time. But the mindset is, because of the other research that's out there, as long as you hit your macros, you can eat what you want. It's just not the case. I'm sure you can expound on that.
Well, so that's a great segue, especially on the heels of intermittent fasting, to talk about what I termed metabolic positioning. And you will only know that term if you've read our book, because it's not, something that is described in literature. But I like to create visual ways, or at least illustrations that are easy to understand. So I'm going to tell you where things are simplified a little bit, so they're not exactly totally black and white, but so you can understand how to lose body fat the fastest, the easiest. So it's metabolically, the most favorable thing for you, and I think behaviorally it's a lot easier. So let me explain it this way. I'll start out by making a claim. On the same amount of calories, based on how you structure your food, specifically a macronutrient profile, so the amount of protein, carbs, and fat, you can lose up to 50% more body fat. Same amount of calories. Think in terms of a week. So you can have it's the same amount of calories in a week, and based on how you break that up per day and in a specific macronutrient profile within some flexible ranges, you can lose body fat up to 50% faster. So now, think about losing 50 pounds. Do you want that to take a year? Or would you like to, make that in 6 months? With the same amount of effort, would you like it to be, this much food or this much food? Any way you cut those metrics, I'm going to show you a way that you can lose weight, body fat, much, much faster and that much easier. You guys all look so serious now. It's like, oh my gosh, finally we get something good. All right. So our body, as I said earlier, uses carbohydrate as its primary source of energy. And that's because glucose, the smallest form of sugar, is what is used by cells most readily. Even though we can use things like fatty acids and so forth, glucose is preferred because it's the most easy to just assimilate. Matter of fact, my freshman daughter in her biology course was studying last night plasma membranes, so the phospholipid barrier. So I was on the couch helping her with active and passive transport. And glucose is a passive transport thing because it's so small. So basically that means that your cells can just suck this glucose in for energy and use it. Doesn't take a lot of work inside your body. So when you consume glucose, you're giving your body immediate accessible energy for all your cells. But if you're dieting, what do you want those cells to be using for energy? Body fat. So how do we transition our body from being so good and just right in line first at the buffet for glucose? How can we make our body want body fat? First of all, we have to make it less readily available. But there's a continuum here. So, think of an energy continuum where our body will use carbohydrate first, glucose first. We want it to use body fat. So now we have this spectrum, and we've got to get from point A to point B. So here's how this happens, and I think it helps if it's kind of a physical illustration. So kind of like the Hippocratic Oath doctors take, first do no harm. If I'm on a diet, the first thing I want to do is stop storing new body fat. If I'm eating a couple meals a day, or I'm eating a lot of fat at one time, or even a lot of carbohydrates at one time, and my body can only use so much energy at once, what's my body going to do with that excess energy? It's going to store it as fat. So the first thing I have to do is stop storing fat. So first you have to know this. There is a finite amount of food you can consume in one meal without instantly storing it as body fat. And that's a little bit of a misnomer because you're going to start some storage as soon as you take your first bite. Your body's primed for that. You start producing amylase, other enzymes to digest it. Insulin starts secreting. Even if you eat protein, your body starts releasing insulin, which is the storage hormone. Even if you just smell food, your body starts doing this. So you can't stop it completely. So when I say I'm going to try and create a nice, clean, physical illustration, just remember, it's not black and white or just flipping switches on or off. There's a gradient, but if you make these percentages work for you, you're going to get all of the result. So the first thing I have to know, if I'm over here and my body is used to carbohydrates, and I'm not necessarily losing weight, so I'm just getting ready to start my diet, and here we go, step one. I can only eat 25 to maybe 50 grams of carbs at a time before I start really storing them as body fat. And that's very contextual. Some people can eat a lot more than that, some people can eat less. Totally dependent on your metabolism and your context, activity level. If I've just run a 5K, I can use a lot more than 25. If I've just woken up and I'm not going to be active in the morning, I probably don't need even that much. But so context driven, we can only have or utilize so much carbohydrate at once. Same thing goes for protein. If we just eat unlimited amounts of protein, matter of fact, most research shows that about 20 grams of protein is the threshold where you get all the benefits of that. And you go much more over 25 to 35 grams, and you just start converting that protein into glucose. So now your body's going to use that instead of body fat, or you're going to convert it to body fat. So even something like clean, healthy protein, too much is too much. So the third macronutrient, fat, this is why a low-fat, higher-carb diet wins every time, even against a low-carb diet. Remember I said in an inpatient setting, it wins every time? This is why. Have you guys heard of thermogenesis or the thermic effect of food? So, wow, you're a smart crowd. Those are big terms. You guys should be proud of yourselves. So there's a certain amount of energy. It's because you have Michael up here. That's why. Michael and Candace are just carrying the torch. So the thermic effect of food is how much energy it takes to digest the food you're consuming. So if I consume 30 grams of protein, how much of those calories are used to digest that protein? And something that's very complex like protein is about 30%. So about a third of those calories that you've just consumed are actually used to digest the food you consumed. So it's almost like getting a 30% off coupon, right? At Bed Bath & Beyond. It's like, I eat this chicken breast and only 2/3 of it even gets used. So it's free. Carbohydrates kind of range between about 5 and 30%. If they're complex, whole food, healthy carbs, it can be right up there like protein. If it's a lot of simple sugar that doesn't take much energy to digest, then, that's your answer. It doesn't take much energy to digest. Fat, though, when you consume fat, even if it's good fat, like everybody's probably taking, coconut oil by the spoonful, just like we used to take flaxseed oil 20 years ago, and everybody's always looking for the good fats, right? Even a good fat is still fat. And in the presence of enough glucose or enough calories in a meal, your body will store about 97% of that fat as fat instantly. So if you guys have ever heard me speak, one of my favorite illustrations is when I was in organic chemistry in college. Our professor wanted to show this point. Maybe it was a biochemistry course. And so he had a volunteer, probably had to sign some waivers because they were drawing blood, but this volunteer student, they drew blood, and they just put that test tube vial of blood right there, and we're looking at that, and nothing's happening. They then had that student eat a cheeseburger and fries. And then about 15 minutes later, they drew blood, and they put that blood next to there. So these two test tubes of blood they just look identical, right? Within just minutes, I mean, it almost seemed instantly, you saw oil start separating from the hemoglobin, the blood, and within minutes, the top half of that test tube of blood just looked like canola oil, and the rest was there. And that's what fat, even a healthy fat, even a trans fat or a fat that would be solid at room temperature, when it's in your body at 98 degrees, it turns into liquid. And that fat is instantly just taken in through that phospholipid barrier, your cells, and stored as fat. So when you consume more fat than you need at a particular meal, it's just going to be stored as fat. So people who think, well, gosh, I'm eating 0 carbs, but I'm eating all of this great healthy fat, whether it's almonds or whatever, it still is going to be stored as fat. And you might use it in between meals, which is what I'm going to kind of illustrate next, but it's still not that efficient. So let me get back to my illustration over here. I'm starting my diet. I'm on day 1. I'm listening to Michael Wilkie, and he's saying, eat a boring diet that has healthy, clean carbohydrates and less saturated fat and enough protein. But he's giving you very specific recommendations, right? Because we all have different genetics. Our metabolic capacity is different. Our goals are different. You could be 300 pounds or 102 pounds, gender, activity level, all of these differences. And so the amounts would vary. So let's say that Michael got out his magic 8 cue ball and he found those right numbers for you, and you start that process. If you are doing things well and you're not storing body fat at each meal, in between meals you need a secondary energy source, right? So if my body has used all of that food that I consumed at my last meal, and I'm going to now be not eating for 3 or 4 hours, and I need energy to bridge that gap, what's my body going to use? Somebody said fat? I set you guys up. It is not fat. That was a misdirection on purpose. First, your body's going to use stored carbohydrates. Because glucose, like I said, carbohydrates are the body's preferred source of energy. Luckily, we have this mechanism in our body that when we run low on blood sugar, you don't see us just walking along and then we pass out dead. We have transitional carbohydrates to bridge that gap. Fat takes longer to digest. We can use fat, and we do use fat almost all day long. It's constantly, our body's using some carbs, some fat. Like I said, it's not a switch on or off. It's kind of a needle that goes back and forth. So, in between meals, the first couple of days, my body's going to use stored carbohydrates. We store carbs in our liver, our muscle tissue, and that's going to get us 2 or 3 days down the road. So every time I eat a meal, I use that food. In between meals, I'm using my stored carbohydrates. Eventually, I get 2, 3, 4 days down the road, and now I'm out of stored carbohydrates. So now what's my body going to use? All right. Okay. I was afraid you guys might be afraid to answer that now. So now I can finally go to this third position where my body is going to start dominantly using more body fat than ever because that's its next go-to level. So, just kind of bonus. I usually don't talk about this, but you guys are smart. You knew what thermic effect was. Let's say I'm in this third position and it's going so well, and I know managing my carbs is a gateway to the success. So if controlling my carbs a little bit like this is good, Michael Wilkie is saying I can still eat oatmeal and things like that, and maybe even a bagel once in a while. Heaven forbid I could eat fruit on a diet. Can I eat fruit? I can eat fruit. Michael says I can eat fruit. But what if I say, man, I'm getting such good results. What if I just don't eat any carbs? What's the next source of energy my body's going to use? Muscle. I could go out of bounds, and then I can start using lean body mass as energy. Anybody want to lose lean body mass? Which decreases strength, bone density, metabolic capacity. So now you're going to be using less and less calories. So we want to guard against that. That's one of my beefs against that ketogenic diet. I said if you have a medical condition, you really need to be on 0 carbs. you should do that. But not only is it the least sustainable in studies, not only is it not the best or the healthiest, if you do it, you will suppress your metabolism and you will lose lean body mass, you will lose bone density, that kind of thing. So a low-carb diet takes you too far on that metabolic continuum. So what happens if I get to that third position and now all of a sudden, when I'm consuming meals, I still use that energy first, so I take a step over here, then in between meals, I'm back over here. What's happening in my body? I'm just becoming more efficient at using body fat as energy. So when I said you can use body fat up to 50% faster as your primary source of energy outside of food, that's why. Because look what happens if I say, well, that's great, man, I got through a successful week and it's amazing, so I'm going to go out with Michael tonight and I'm going to have a couple margaritas and a couple baskets of chips, maybe a burrito. What happens if I eat a couple 100 grams of carbs at one sitting when I know my body really could only use about 25 or 50, best case scenario? What's my body going to do with all those carbs? It's going to store them back in my liver and my muscle tissue. I'm going to start converting some of that to body fat instantly. That's another story. That would be a whole nother lecture talking about how digestion happens just instantly and what's happening in your body. But just for the sake of simplicity, all of a sudden I've refilled my body's glycogen or carbohydrate stores. So where am I now? I'm back where I started, and now I've got 3 or 4 days of perfect dieting again to get back to burning body fat most efficiently. So I could be, how many meals are you going to eat in a week? 7 times 3, 21 to 30, 40 meals a week. What if I get almost all of them right, but I just have that one great big cheat meal, right? Then I'm right back over here. One of the best stories I have about this is a client of mine who scheduled his appointment, his initial consultation, and he came in and he said, man, this is going to be great. Matter of fact, I was so excited about this that I kind of started last week, so I've already lost 10 pounds in the last week. So I said, well, that's fantastic. All of this stuff I just explained to you about metabolic positioning already happened, because for every gram of carbohydrate or glycogen in our body that we lose, it holds on to 3 times its weight in water. So you lost a lot of glycogen and water and obviously some body fat. So now you are in that awesome metabolic position so that you are already losing maximum body fat. And he said, well, I didn't tell you the whole story. So I did my whole week of dieting and I lost 10 pounds and that was great. I knew I was coming in today. So all of my friends and I went out Saturday and we had pizza and just pitchers of beer, and I regained 11 pounds. So lost 10 in a week of great work, gained 11 in one night of fun. That, my friends, is America diet. That is us at our worst, but is it really bad? You work really hard for a week, right? You should get a little playtime. You should get a little reward, right? It's just the amount in the context, in understanding what's happening so that you can control those boundaries, because you should be able to have some rewards like that. And I don't even like to call food a reward, because then depriving yourself of food is that punishment when it's actually just maybe being healthy. So I think language matters, and we choose to call things like that just kind of a higher carb day or a higher calorie day, or a day that you're just going up to maintenance level so that you can sustain your metabolism better. But to just go out and have a blatant binge and then self-sabotage like that is definitely the price we don't want to pay. So some of this stuff is where I started 25 years ago, just looking at the field of nutrition and understanding how people are failing. And I knew, even as a young, pretentious academic, that all people had to do to start, if they wanted success, is learn. They have to be presented information. But again, there are so many more people out there doing this today without the training, without the support, that it's almost worse. Like, we're getting more extreme. We're getting weird stuff. And before I forget, let me just do this little kind of a PSA for Michael and the kind of training these guys go through. In our company, the Diet Doc, first of all, anybody who does nutrition consulting without being a medical doctor or a registered dietitian is doing it illegally. And every state has laws, and even just suggesting to somebody outside of education, you can tell somebody, hey, an apple has fiber, an apple has no fat, it's a healthy food. That's okay. As soon as you say, have an apple a day, you're prescribing nutrition, and you can be fined and you can go to jail. But, and that's why in our company, we go to the extent we have 2 medical directors on staff, paid employees. We have a registered dietitian. We have a health psychologist. Inside of our pool of peer program owners like Michael, we have nurse practitioners. We have pharmacists, all kinds of things. So when we train our owners and send them out there, not only are they getting the best curriculum and education, they're getting the best ongoing daily support. A question is a second away from being answered, but it's also legal and, in my opinion, ethical. So when I rail against bad information being disseminated out there today, like I did 25 years ago, I think it's a valid point because people get hurt. I can't tell you how many people I have come to me with all kinds of permanent digestive issues because I have a nutrition consultant telling them to do weird stuff, or permanent hormonal endocrine system issues because they were listening to somebody who should have never been giving nutrition advice. So that's why I love doing these kind of talks, because it gives you guys a taste of the kind of training that Candace and Mike and all of our program owners go through. So these are smart people. Let's give these guys a hand before we wrap up. Candace and Michael. So yes, sir.
I'm just curious, if the body gets energy from three macronutrients, you use the term it burns fat, it burns muscle, but muscle isn't a macronutrient. So what part of the muscle does it burn?
Amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of basically anything biological, the nitrogen compounds. So your muscle fiber has amino acids. So a muscle fiber usually can't be catabolized. If you did a biopsy of a muscle tissue, you could have 200 pounds of muscle and then just waste away, go on a starvation diet, lose 60 or 80 pounds, and then do the biopsy. You will still have the same amount of muscle fibers there. You just have less amino acid content. So that's how you use muscle as energy. It's actually the amino acid content. So the thickness of the muscle fibers and so forth. So any questions on that stuff, the physiology, the nutrition elements? Yes.
When you do that kind of damage to your body, like we were just talking about, all the bad nutrition, what can happen, like I've seen girls, I have a friend of mine who had really bad nutrition advice, and her body is so messed up right now, hormonally. Can you get that back? Can it be brought back to a healthy state again?
It's a rare case when somebody has permanent hormonal damage, and there's some terms that have been bantered around, like metabolic damage and things like that. It just doesn't exist. 5% of the population at large has thyroid insufficiency, and then you're put on Synthroid or something like that. You can be low in testosterone, things like that, and have hormonal replacement. So most of the time, it will recover. If you've been dieting extremely hard and aggressively and you've lost all kinds of weight, you can be metabolically suppressed. I have a client right now who is a professional bikini competitor, and she, in my opinion, is she certainly has body dysmorphia. She has veins in her abs, just tissue paper skin, and she thinks if she gains 1 pound, it's too much. And I've helped her gain 2, 3, 4, 5 pounds, and she just looks better and healthier. Her muscle tissue is getting fuller, still no body fat. She's actually eating a really good amount of food, if she's being honest with me. but she just recently had some blood work done, and her thyroid levels are down. And it's because she's been in that metabolic set point position for so long. Our bodies don't function well with that low of a body fat level. And when you're in that low of body fat level, your body is trying to survive. And it survives by using less energy, conserving energy. So those hormones are going to decrease because the master glands controlled by the brain are going to be signaled to slow down so that you can preserve lean body mass and organ tissue. So it's normal when you're that lean or you're dieting that hard for your metabolism to slow down, and it's going to be slowed down by decreasing things like thyroid and testosterone. Now, it can come back most of the time, 95%, if you will, because you let your body fat come back up a little bit. You don't have to gain 50 pounds, but you can bring your food intake up and bring your body fat up a little bit. But anybody who has gone to the point of severe metabolic insufficiency, then yeah, you might be stuck with having to supplement that medically. So, well, I'll tell you what, guys, I'm gonna wrap this up so we can stop this live feed, but then I'm gonna stick around and we can answer some questions. But I wanna ask you one final question. As I did with my class at the Signature School in Evansville, Indiana yesterday, who do you want to be? We specialize in our company with things like this, physiology, science, because I like it. So that's what we do. But the reason I brought in Dr. Corey Probst as our health psychologist, wellness director, vice president, and business partner is because 10 years ago when I met her, I knew this was what was needed more. If you don't have the emotional health, the tools to apply these things, there's no way we're going to get from 98% failure rate to a higher level of success. Because we don't have a problem eating better, making a few good decisions, losing some weight. We have a problem making that a habit. So my question to you, like my 15-year-old future Wall Street stockbroker, is if you can envision who you want to be, and especially in tonight's topic of your physical health, then you need to act like that person now. It's not that you're going to crash diet, do extreme things, hit that finish line, and then take a right turn somewhere. Whatever that person is, look around you. Look at healthy people that you want to emulate. And I asked that kid, I said, what are some examples? Who do you want to look like? And so he named, kind of a celebrity. And I said, what do you think he eats? Do you think he goes and eats quarter pounders with cheese and fries for lunch? Do you think he drinks pitchers of beer and eats large pizzas with his friends on Friday and Saturday night? What does that guy do? If you want to look like that guy, you want to be like that guy, you probably need to make decisions like that guy. So here's my challenge to you. I came up with an idea. I love neuroscience. This program I'm working on right now, the academic program in social psychology, is because I love that whole topic of how we interact, how our brains work. I just love this stuff. And I had this concept through reading, a lot of people in the industry, that when stimuli comes into our brain, it might not necessarily be sorted out and used the same way with every person. We often, like a kid, a kid makes a mess and you think, oh my gosh, why can't you be cleaner or whatever? And we make the mistake of treating kids like small adults, and their brains are drastically different. They're not even developed. We can look at our friends and say, oh my gosh, how can you do that? But every single one of us has a different brain. It works differently. We think differently. There are different character strengths, attributes, physiological changes that will never at all be like you. So we need to be able to recognize those things in ourselves. There are a lot of even quizzes. Corey, I think it's University of Pennsylvania, where they have positive psychology as a discipline, has these tests you can take that help you understand your personality traits. There's a big one going around YouTube right now called the Big 5 personality tests. I had my whole dinner table doing this in LA a couple weeks ago. We were doing these personality tests. Oh my gosh, you're 100% of this, and I'm 68% of this. And then you can see those things. You can say, wow, I am high in orderliness. Like, I view the world as a grid, black, white, right, wrong, everything has to have its place. I need everything on my desk to be at 90-degree angles. And you can be like that, and somebody else is just like living in a mess, and they're very creative, and you can see these things. But here's what I want you to think. Instead of just those kind of character traits, think of your brain in 3 ways. So I said the most primitive part of our brain, the reptilian brain, is there for impulse, for flight or fight. It's threat-based. And if you receive information and act that way all the time, you're not going to be very popular, although you can now become president. I told you I would hit some political jokes. I warned you. But if everything is just impulse and you instantly react, then with food, you're probably going to be somebody that has a stressful moment and you just eat. And then you blame that stressful moment. It wasn't me. I just, it was emotional eating. I don't know. It just happened. But if you step back and think, why am I doing that? That part of my brain felt a threat, and I responded that way, and it might be physically appropriate. Because when we're under stress, our body starts using glucose. Our body starts secreting energy into our bloodstream, and we're ready for that flight or fight moment. And as soon as that lets down, you do get hungry. You want to refuel. And so that's a physical response. But it's based on primitive reaction. We happen to have this thing called a neocortex that separates us from other species, that if we step back and think, we can make decisions differently. And in between, we have our limbic system, or early mammalian brain, which makes decisions more on emotion. So you can have that massive threat-based decision-making capacity where everything is decided like that, very impulsively. You can have this emotional thing where it's just, maybe how you feel that day. I feel this way, or maybe this person says this, and so I'll try that, or I don't want to offend this person, who's feeding me this, so I'll just eat this, and we make decisions like that. Or your executive center, your neocortex, you can create a plan. And think of it like this. Anything you've been successful at, I guarantee you have used your frontal cortex more than those other 2 parts of your brain. The most highly functioning executive center of your brain is there to make those kinds of decisions. You don't pretend the other ones don't exist. You just, none of that's going to go away, but you have to learn to say, okay, I'm in this position right now. This is where I typically break down and I do this. Why is that? Is it because of some kind of a perceived threat or anxiousness? Is it because I'm just kind of putting too much into the context? What would I do if I was just making the best, most disciplined decision? The person I want to be, what decision would they make? And I just read, I was actually in the Nashua Public Library right off of Main Street this afternoon. So yeah, I get off the plane and that's where I go. That's what nerds do. And there was a whole section right next to the philosophy section. As soon as you walk in the front doors and walk back there, there's a row of philosophy section. Part of that is the self-development, and there's a great neuropsychology, neurodevelopment section. And there was a book. I should look at my pictures on my phone. I took a picture of it. The entire premise of the book was just that. Decision-making after a pause. This, whoever it was, psychologist or something, was saying, listen, you are a completely different person if every time you make a decision, you step back and you pause. And Dr. Probst, our health psychologist, I love her illustration. She said, think of it like watching your life on a marquee. Don't just live in your head and get stuck just rattling around. Just take a step back and say, okay, here's the situation I'm facing right now. if I was not me, but I was just looking at this decision-making process with all of these options for a client or somebody else, what would they do? What would the best decision be? So it's getting out of your own head, pausing so you can engage the more advanced part of your brain and act more in line with who you want to be instead of just reacting. Thank you, guys.